podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And this week, I'm really happy to welcome onto the program Ricardo Rozzi. Ricardo, thanks so much for making time for us.
No, thank you very much for having me. And we almost met at the University of North Texas some years ago, and now I'm here in the Magellan region, actually at the Strait of Magellan. Most often I'm south of the Strait of Magellan in Cape Horn itself, where we have a Biocultural center.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And yeah, like you said, you are a professor at the University of North Texas, and you also work at the Universidad de Magallanes. And so I'm really curious to hear that perspective, knowing that you have a pretty good sense of the difference between North America and Latin America. And yeah, we just missed each other at the University of North Texas. I think you must have showed up like the year I graduated or something. It was like around there. So I never got to take one of your classes, but really happy to learn more about your work and kind of just an overview for it for folks tuning in. You're a Chilean ecologist and philosopher, and your research combines ecology and philosophy, studying interrelations between the ways of knowing and inhabiting the natural world. And so you see a continuous reciprocal feedback between ecology and philosophy, and you've edited a number of really great books, Earth Stewardship, Linking Ecology and Ethics in Theory and Practice, from biocultural homogenization to biocultural conservation, and Field Environmental Philosophy, Education for Biocultural Conservation. So lots of cool stuff, especially that you link theory and practice. Like you're saying, you know, you have this biocultural center for conservation. So before we get into your work currently, I always like to hear a little bit of people's kind of biography of how you get into this kind of work, especially because it's unique to bridge the worlds of ecology and philosophy. There's still plenty of scientists who don't want to get into discussions of ethics and values and culture and our wisdom traditions. So how did you find yourself on this kind of path?
Yeah, no, thank you, Sam. And maybe if there is the opportunity, you can tell me a little bit how you came to this too. And I was lucky to have great grandparents in addition to my parents. And the four grandparents came from Italy with different tasks. And that's lapwing, if you hear something.
Oh,
So
nice.
and one of them came as a surgeon and directed a hospital, which in 1964, when I started to accompany him, I was 4 years old, but I still recall he was director of this hospital for public medicine. And so health was a right for everybody, was funded by the state. And as part of that, the directors of hospitals or divisions like, let's say, surgery or other divisions within the hospital had to visit the regions of the country. We're not a federal country, we're a centralized country, but still we have regions. And so at 4 years old, I remember in October, I accompanied him to southern Chile, and we took a train, then was a Chevrolet truck. We were received by the health division of the Ministry of Health that was in Temuco. Temuco means water of Temu, which is water provided by a tree. That's the language of the Mapuche indigenous people there. So it was a whole world for me at 4 years old. And we stopped, and then we had to hike about 2,000 meters, that is 6,000 feet in one day. And we did it through bamboos. So we had machete. And while we were doing this, my grandfather managed to learn some of the indigenous languages. In this case, is Mapu Sungun. Mapu means land, Sungun, the tongue. and the tongue means both the tongue, the actual tongue, but also the language.
Mm,
And in
right.
this case, it's the language of the land. And Mapudungun is a very, very onomatopoeic language.
Mm,
So the lonco means head in Mapudungun, but also means the chief person of an indigenous community.
mm,
And he went to welcome us, and then we hiked together. And I was listening to the birds along the hike, and I asked the lonco, "What's the name of that?" I said, "What, what, what?" So, but that's how the bird called.
right.
Yeah, that's the name. And then Chukau, Chukau. What's the name? Chukau. And so I never forget that the language was very reciprocal. And later I met a shaman that was not that in 64, was later, 68. And the shaman was the birdman, Unyumke.
Hmm.
Unyum is bird, and Che is the person of the birds.
Hmm.
And he imitated the birds, but it was amazing. The birds came to him. He had such a kind of skill that he was able to have a dialogue.
Wow.
So we went through the Chusquia, we hiked, and suddenly we arrived to about the tree line in a field of lava with patches of monkey puzzle trees. The monkey puzzle trees are the Araucaria. These trees are conifers from the times and previous to the times of dinosaurs.
Wow.
Actually, a lot of dinosaurs films have been filmed there, recorded there.
Wow.
And later I learned that John Muir, his last trip abroad was taking a boat to Buenos Aires through the Atlantic, New York, Buenos Aires, and then he took a train from Buenos Aires to Mendoza, crossed the Andean Cordillera, arrived to Santiago, the capital city of Chile, and he spent only a week in Chile. But of the week, he spent 4 days at the same place I am talking about because he
Really?
was obsessed with meeting a monkey puzzle tree. I invite the persons that are listening or watching this program to take a look at that essay by John Muir, because it's very moving how a person can be such connected to a tree through readings and then to actually embody that encounter. And I will not spoil essay.
Interesting.
It's relatively easy to find. Is the monkey puzzle tree, and Araucaria araucana is the scientific name. We arrived there, and the communities were organized according to patches of monkey puzzle trees. Very interesting, around a relatively big lake. And well, my grandfather had to go to different of these huts, and there were groups of huts, and these were circular. Well, it was sunset, and we were welcome to sleep and to spend the night at one of these huts. Very interesting because at the center was a fire and a lot of conversations. Everything was going on around the fire. We had chicha, which is like a cider, let's say a vernacular champagne. But made of the seeds of the monkey puzzle tree. They are relatively large, like pines, these seeds of pines that we have in the US, in Colorado,
Right.
but I would say 20, 30 times larger. I mean,
Oh, wow.
each was like, yeah. And that was very tasty for me. And I was 4 years old, very curious, with open eyes and everything around the fire. And then we went to sleep, and the whole family slept around the fire, including the doctor, my grandfather, and myself, and a couple of dogs, of course. So that was a little bit the beginning. And he was very influential to me, my grandfather, but also I accompanied him from 64 to 73. What happened on September 11, 73 we have also a very sad September 11 in Chile, which is the military coup when Pinochet took the power, and that was very violent. So all what I am talking about was stop. And medicine began to be privatized, and we followed the Chicago Boys School of Economy. And today we are paying the price of having done that, because we have problems with access to health today. But coming back to 64, I also accompanied him to the coast of Chile, which is a very long country. So we have a long coastal area. We met fishermen, not only indigenous community, but fishermen with a lot of knowledge, local knowledge. My grandfather was a hunter and fisherman. I suffered a little bit as a kid when I saw the fishes coming and the birds, but I learned a lot from the people and from my grandfather. Now, the other grandfather came with the Salesian mission, and the Salesian that comes from Don Bosco. The idea is to have schools, technical schools, no? And he didn't want to be a person, just a craftsman for iron and things like that. So he escaped from my great grandfather's house and met a Capuchin from the Cappuccino, the Order of the Cappuccino from Germany.
Right.
And this is Father Tadeo, very well known in Chile because he started the whole hydrotherapy school. He brought from Germany a school of hydrotherapy and also the use of medicinal plants from Europe and homeopathic procedures. So at the end, my grandfather, Silvio Rozzi, studied pharmacy, and the old style that the pharmacists prepare the tablets, prepare how to say, teas, herbal teas, and prescribed some. And he was an ideologist. Do you say in English ideologist when you do a diagnosis through the eye, no?
Oh, I think optometry.
No. You see in the iris and the pupil how the whole organism is doing.
Oh.
I think it's ideology or ideology. In Spanish, it's ideólogo.
Oh, okay.
It's iris, and you study the iris, and through the iris of the eye, is iris the word?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the pupil of the iris. You see you map the whole body.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Huh.
And the order of the Capuchinos was very important in Chile because they had several ethnographers that came from Germany, but also very practical people with technical schools. Well, my grandfather joined them, and they created the first clinic of natural medicine in Chile. That was in the 60s. And he always had his habits of having cold water in the morning and then doing some exercises. He was strict vegetarian. He always had discussions with my other grandfather. I will tell you the end of this story, because he said, how can you eat a cadaver? A dead body, that's not fair. And I heard both, and both had different wisdoms. So he always was dreaming with making the life of people better through the plants and through natural medicine. And really, when I came to the university, they persuaded me to study medicine. I was not so convinced because my own school was music. I was music composer. I had my other two grandmothers. One was the daughter of a orchestra director in Genova, and the other was a concert and pianist.
Wow.
So, for me, music was the highest of the highest habits and practices of humanity. So I started to write music very little kid, and I went through the conservatorium, the music school, all the years. but they convinced me to apply to the medical school, right? And linking things together here, when we had in 1973 the military taking power, they burned many of the books in philosophy, and it was forbidden to study philosophy.
Wow.
It was so brutal, and this is still, I think, on YouTube. You can see this. On 4 days after, more or less, they took the power on TV. There was a program saying, and we will burn all the books about Cuba. Here you see Picasso, one cubist, Miro, another cubist, and they burned all these painters without understanding even what they were burning. This general was there, so it was quite brutal. But I was already in 4th year of medicine doing psychiatry, which was my ideal. And they reopened the first school of philosophy. And I couldn't resist the temptation. And the temptation was stronger. And then I left medicine for dismay of my parents. And I combined biology and philosophy. So that's the way I started.
Wow. That's great. That's a just wonderful story. And so many pieces intersect there of, the natural landscape that you're in, the culture, political movements, your relationship with your parents, grandparents. Yeah, that's just great. It's kind of similar for me in a way, very different in so many ways. But I grew up with a lot of like camping and fishing and stuff like that, but never thought of making any work with nature part of my career. I loved music. And so was pretty obsessed with piano and trumpet and guitar. And so from like the age of 10 to maybe 19 or something, that was my whole world. And then something clicked where I took a philosophy class and fell in love with it, and then found my way, because I was growing up in Texas, in the North Texas area, and so I knew there was a nice school nearby, and I was really just at University of North Texas for the philosophy part of philosophy, but of course there's this amazing emphasis on environmental ethics, and so I ended up really falling in love with environmental ethics, and then came out to the San Francisco Bay Area, did my PhD out here, and happened to get a job at the University of San Francisco teaching environmental ethics. That was the first class I taught, and then I've been there ever since, and continue to just absolutely love this intersection of environmental thinking with ethics, philosophy, religion, that whole side of things. So yeah, always interesting to meet somebody else who left the world of music behind, or I guess not behind, but not necessarily as a career path. Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I want to talk more specifically about your work, because you have so many different facets of things that you do. But a big one is this idea of biocultural conservation, which is kind of the antidote to biocultural homogenization. So I wonder if you could kind of introduce those terms for us.
Yeah. And it has to do a little bit with the history. We have been talking that it's personal, but has to do with the context, in the sense that music is clearly a very formal cultural activity. And I say formal because among the arts, music is particularly formal in terms of mathematics, although any art can be more or less formal depending on the school. But I study musical composition, contemporary classical music. So it's the form. I mean, and so you have some lenses, you have some paradigms, some concepts. And when I met the people in biology, it really, the first thing that was paradoxical was, on the one hand, I love to be in the field, yes, but I found that they thought that they were looking at trees as if trees in themselves, a kind of pre-Kantian concept. And to talk about culture, another aspect was not so often the case. A little bit because, as I said, during the dictatorship, we had forbidden. It was forbidden to teach philosophy, so we couldn't have philosophy of science. It was to be really, I think, more technocrats or normal science in the sense of Kuhn,
Right.
without critical thinking. So the biocultural concept for me was from the very beginning a very kind of disciplinary aspect. We need to question the assumptions. We need philosophy as a craft, as a practice, not only kind of a general knowledge, but as a method of, and so also how we construct the narratives we have behind. That is the first part. So scientific stories and scientific narratives, and this has come out in your program, has come up in several of the interviews, are narratives that we build with particular method of testing and contrasting and, well, keeping an explanation as plausible or saying, no, this was wrong. But I was exposed to the poetic part, creating realities, music composition, and I was also exposed to different types of knowledge. And when I say different types of knowledge, this is very important for me and it's key and central for why I do what I do and what I am trying to do. We have indigenous knowledges everywhere, including Europe, in the sense that my grandparents are from Belluno, that is in the Dolomiti, that's a little bit north of Venice, in the Alps, the southern part of the Alps. They still prepare herbal teas. They have their own craft, their own vegetable gardens. And in the sculpture in the town, Santa Justina of one is the spirit of the forest. That is the central sculpture in the village, in the town. So it's not true, one thing, that Western and non-Western. That dichotomy, I think it's very paralyzing. We have a lot of options within Western, and the difficulty we have to understand this is, of course, that the media are very concentrated, monopolized by a few, and it seems as if utilitarianism, consequentialism, calculus, self-interest is all about Western culture. No, that's an accident that I think we need to balance. But Western civilization started with the pre-Socratic and it's still that way. And I do part of my field work in the Alps, both on the German side and on the Italian side, with husbandry activities, so to bring the cows or the sheep, sometimes goats, that are critical for the well-being of the communities, but also for maintaining prairies, because if not, we would have only forests coming in. And that's not so different from Colorado and the Rocky Mountains, although I am less familiar with that. But it's very similar to other situations I know in the Andean range and the Andean Cordillera of South America. So in summary, on the one hand, theoretically and experientially, I knew that when I understand a tree, there is something from the observer, in this case myself, but also the collective community to which I belong, and something from the tree, the biophysical tree that is there, like Martin Buber, no? To let the tree speak to you. But that is by no way the only way. And Western is much more diverse, Western civilization, Western culture than we tend to see. And of course, I think the challenge is how we can have intercultural dialogues and coordination to really relocate the value of life above the value of capital. And I say that because with the Chicago Boys, this neoliberal economy of which Chile was the experimental country, and then spread out, we need to deconstruct that in order to have something that's broader. And I'm not saying that capitalism is wrong. What I think is it's wrong to have only capitalism because it becomes too narrow. And more or less, that is what is my interface today of work at the Congress in Chile, at the United Nations, for example, with the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or with commissions on protected areas. And here I have led the establishment of biosphere reserves, which are a program coordinated by the Man and Biosphere Program of UNESCO. So, but always with the idea that we humans are diverse. There are several ways of knowing, and most of the ways of knowing are sensitive to the area because they have a local coupling with the reality, practical knowledge, yeah?
Yeah.
And so the challenge is to how to allow that to be expressed again, and that's the biocultural knowledge. The biocultural diversity is both biological and cultural and couple and interrelationships.
That's really great. I mean, you couldn't have summarized more effectively, I think, the aim of what we do at the Forum on Religion and Ecology, which is exactly that, to try and open up people's attention to all these ways of knowing. And there's so many ways of knowing across the planet, and so many of them do have that sensitivity to their local place, to their environment. And the more that we can tap into those, the more we can respond to all the urgent challenges facing life on Earth today. And I also really like that point that you're not saying capitalism is wrong. You're saying it is not sufficient. There's other ways of knowing that have to be brought in to contextualize whatever it's about. I think that's a good way to put it, because obviously capitalism gets something right, because it gets so many products to so many people, and it helps, so many businesses and all that. So it must have something right. I think sometimes when people have these really serious critiques of capitalism, they throw it out entirely. And even if that's true, I can't imagine you're going to win over many people with that kind of argument. And if you're working with governmental institutions and things like that have a capitalist orientation, it's like, okay, we can work with that. But we need to recover all these other ways of knowing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, and it's very interesting because even those articles that are foundational, and on the one hand, and we can talk about this because I think that Lin White Jr., when he wrote the historical roots of our ecological crisis, he was not criticizing Christianism only, he was criticizing the Baconian project mostly. But even within the context, at the end, he finds a solution, a way, saying, well, here at least we have St. Francis. And it's very interesting because this is current today, given that the Pope took the name of Francis. And if we witness what the Pope is dealing with, is about poverty, justice, peace, which is essentially, these are social dimensions. So, and then nature, what we do to nature. So they're not dissociated. And that is a Franciscan tradition that even precedes Francis somehow, and it's still alive. And it's still alive. I mean, that is also a kind of another way of saying we can find intersections, integrations. And that's the reason I follow a little bit the series and the work that you do with religion. And the latest volume we had in the series of Ecology and Ethics, the book series with Springer, is called Pantheism, Panentheism, and Ecology. It's a very interesting volume edited by Luca Valera. He's an Italian philosopher currently in Spain. And he invited different perspectives on ontology, history, but also ethics. And we have some radical thinkers not radical, I mean, community-based thinkers also in Latin America that go with eco-theology of liberation, like Leonardo Boff and others. So, yeah, I think that and now I say in this interface between the scientific and philosophy policy intersection, tend sometimes to leave religion outside, but religion in a broad sense bring a context we really need. I mean, it's part of really got it and you have explained that too. But I'm really glad to be able to share this here because the Mapuche people, for example, is not only they're connected to these monkey puzzle trees, but they are
Mm.
connected to the volcano, to the stars, to the moon, to the cosmos. That is not so different somehow from what we do in the Alps. So it's still alive. It's not something of the past. And again, it's not instead of the other knowledge, but it's in addition. And I think when all knowledge is mediated, I mean, as increasingly we're experiencing today through social media and the phones, the cell phone, then those subjects, I mean, the monkey puzzle tree, the parrots that also eat the seeds, other people become more objects with icons. And that's not the same because that becomes an object. I mean, it's not a subject that can surprise you.
Right.
And so that's another component that's very important. That's the reason we call our school field environmental philosophy, to be in the field, to really experience with the senses, but also to see things that are not in the media, that you need to experience there, and to be poetic and interact directly, subject to subject. That is extremely important for us.
Yeah, I really love that concept of field environmental philosophy, and especially like you said, that when you're in the field, that you can see things as subjects that surprise you, and there's something about seeing things through our various media where they're just objects; they don't surprise you, and or like you mentioned about Martin Buber, seeing the tree as a you, as a thou, and not just as an it or an object. And to me, that's philosophy at its best. And especially the point you're making of also being open to religion, because I know in public policy, but even in just philosophy, sometimes philosophers have a pretty strong allergy to talking about religion and theology. And so I wonder if we could get into it a little bit more, especially you mentioned Leonardo Boff, who I know you've written about, and his relationship to panentheism. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about the context for his thinking, because part of what he's doing is theology, part of it is liberation movements, which of course have a really robust history in Latin America. So I wonder if you could kind of contextualize his work for us a little bit.
Yeah, and I will begin a little bit with the context of the 60s, which was the social reform, and my grandparents, again, that came through the Salesian. And the emphasis there was to work with the communities. And this is very interesting, these base communities, that you develop practical knowledge, but also somehow you enhance the expression of local knowledge and enrich it through exchanges. And we had many of these experiences in rural schools, with some of these rural schools still exist today in Chile and in Latin America. And it's very interesting that talking about now social resilience and environmental resilience, those are the most resilient. In the sense that the agrarian reform had two phases in Chile. It started with a Christian Democrat, Eduardo Frei Montalva was the president, and then we had the socialist Salvador Allende. And with Salvador Allende, it speed up. And one of the challenges, the distances with the gaps we had, was the know-how, what to do with the land in terms of when it becomes larger scale and you have it owned by the people. And those that were able to manage were those that were kind of with the praxis for several years in base communities and these rural schools. And it's so different from academia. And I have the experience through Catholic rural schools, but I have a very good friend, mentor, I admire him, is Roy May. Maybe he can be at one of your programs in the future. Roy May Jr., he was born in Texas, but was attracted by Latin America, and in the 60s, he left to Bolivia. Then they had a military In Bolivia, he had to move from Bolivia to Brazil and Costa Rica. And then I met him in Costa Rica, where they have the Departamento Ecumenico de Investigaciones, would be the ecumenical research department, and the Universidad Bíblica of the Methodist school. And one thing that is very striking in terms of this practice is the old way, the old fashion, that with some rural students, you spend the whole afternoon learning together. It's very time demanding in the sense, but it's enriching. But you cannot just go give a lecture, go to the next lecture, and because these are different realities. Well, that is rural schools. You do together, you prepare the cider together. There's some vernacular knowledge belonging to the locality, but other knowledges that are brought by this priest. And during the dictatorship, I used to say, because I moved from medicine to philosophy and biology, I said, scientists seem to me more dogmatic than religious persons. And because there is the religion of science somehow.
Right.
And one thing that is very important to again highlight or underscore is that Christianity and religions in general, but let's say Christianity, is very diverse in itself. We have different wings of the Catholic Church, some in this community base, and they created Vicaría de la Solidaridad, which was a shelter to protect in human rights, to protect the life, to accompany, to help people that were suffering, were tortured or oppressed by the dictatorship. But also we had wings of the church that were accompanying the military and the people in power. And that is internal to Christianity. So again, we cannot just talk about Christianity, even within the Catholic. If we broaden beyond the Catholic, then that's your subject, and Buddhism and other religions. But the first thing about Leonardo Boff is that this is the milieu. There was a programmatic agenda to have dictatorships in Latin America. Brazil was the first. So the first person we received in Chile in exile, I was young, but I was able to interact with him, was Paulo Freire. I think in US you say Paulo Freire. How do you pronounce?
I hear a variety. Paulo, I think I hear Freire. That's a very American way to say it. Paulo Freire. But yeah, great writer and thinker.
And that is liberation pedagogy. And he escaped from Brazil to Bolivia, from Bolivia to Chile, and then we went to the US, to Harvard, where he published his Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But the point is that he started in this, well, share what you know with basic things, what you do the everyday life. And he was hand in hand with not Leonardo Boff, but with other people that were running these rural schools. And nobody, that's very important, asked for the dogmatic belief or the dogmatic rituals of the church. It was much more important, if somebody has thirst, give him to drink or air. If they have hunger, we need to find something to eat. And that was the community thing that brought them together. So some people came playing soccer, other things, and some went to the church. Women were very important in that aspect, I remember. And the food was prepared so like the parroquia, the kind of the community base. So then Gustavo Gutierrez, Leonardo Boff, and others say, well, we need to do something to systematize that allows us to give the first expression, the first in all aspects, I mean, prominence and action, to start with the actual reality, not an abstract dogma. So I have experienced liberation in that sense. I mean, be yourself. And we have to recall that most of these people don't exist in history. They don't exist in the media. When there are war, we know about the victims of our countries, but the others are just anonymous numbers. If and we're facing some of those brutal pains today. But during the dictatorship, that was equally that way. I mean, so dignity. I mean, that each person is a person and each person has something to tell. And the second, once you are free, you are not oppressed to have to comply to repeat a cultural model that is brought, the colonial model, let's say, and impose, you are free to express, and that's the first act of liberation. The second is to build, and once you affirm your own identity, of course, we can have intercultural dialogues.
Right.
We enrich each other, and that was fabulous for all what I said. And then Gustavo Gutierrez was very important and is still very in action what he has in the social dimensions in Lima. And Leonardo Boff, for me, became known in 92 because I went with the Birdman, the Mapuche Birdman. We went to the Parallel Earth Summit in Rio.
Oh.
And it was the official Earth Summit that where the Convention for Biological Diversity was signed, Agenda 2021 was in that case, 2030 now. And all those treaties, but there were parallel meetings by NGOs and indigenous communities around. And one of course, the marginal people was Leonardo Boff. And we were fascinated by this guy, the Franciscan, who was in trouble with the Vatican.
Right.
Yeah, and he wrote one of the most beautiful books. I mean, must read. What is his book in the 92 that's translated to English to
Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor?
The other one.
He has the St. Francis book.
No, The Dignity of the Land is, well, but Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor is very important. It's in the same vein. And really, Leonardo Boff really started to write a lot beautifully in the newspapers, radio programs, sharing these gatherings. And then we worked together with Leonardo Boff in, there was Another World is Possible. And that was started in Porto Alegre in Brazil, the World Forum. That was kind of in parallel to Davos, where you had the the wealthy nations meeting, and we were there, the alternatives world. And Leonardo Boff went at least to the first 5. And I remember one, he was together with Eduardo Galeano, a Uruguayan writer, and Noam Chomsky from the US, talking about peace. And really, Leonardo Boff brought the environment to the front. I mean, to this eco-theologian expression that fascinated. And some people was interesting. Some of his partners complained a little bit because he became too theoretical. Yeah, he had the good life of writing, the privilege of communicating. Now he's with the Earth Charter, and we are here with the community base. But I would say in a very kind of humorous and understandable way, in the sense, well, at the end, we need all these facets. I mean, that's, but this, I say that because it has the spice that, again, reminds us that liberation theology, in its origin, for me at least, was practice, practice, practice. And then Leonardo, the practice was writing about, but always in contact. And I have to say that each time we have request his presence, he has come. He helped us with some campaigns, and we are a network. I participate in a network here in Chile, which is Peaceful Resistance. I really believe that peace is a necessary condition, and if we lose, we lose, but we will never give up peace.
Yeah.
And that Paulo Freire, um, Leonardo both are very, very aligned. Paulo Freire always said, if you react with violence, you become like the oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
Very appealing, very also shown by example in his case.
Right. Yeah, that's all very helpful context for thinking about liberation theology and liberation in general, and the Latin American context for it in particular. And I find it all very compelling, and I'm glad that somebody like Boff has spent so much time writing, because then otherwise I might not have heard about this.
Yeah.
And but I get it where it's like, well, but we do need people working with communities too, of course. But it takes all these aspects, like you're saying. And I wonder if you could say, like, I've heard that he was in trouble with the Vatican. I was never clear exactly what their problem was. Because everything he's saying, to me, liberation theology sounds exactly like something you'd hear in the Gospels, and so I'm like, well,
Well,
why were they mad at him?
I can say 2 6, but they're very shallow because you and your forum know much more than I. But I can say they are very good friends, and he's very close to the current Pope.
Mm-hmm.
No, Leonardo Boff was part of the close group for writing the encyclical, the Laudate Si, and yes, Francis the Pope. So somehow the paradoxes of life. I mean,
Yeah.
he's present. Um, but why he was forbidden, and he's not part of the church. I mean, he has a partner now. He's Catholic, and they live together. He changed his life because he's out of the church in that sense. But the details really, I know much less than people that are listening here and than you. The only thing is that he never stopped working. He's a prolific writer, and also very important, a writer that is understood by people in rural communities with the radio. That is what I say to people that say, oh, he became too theoretical. Yes, but not so theoretical, because it's not. And radio are very important still in Latin America. I mean, there was a survey last week here in Chile about the most where people trust the most about news and things like that, because we have the crisis of post-truth and fake news,
Yep.
and radio. Still, people send messages to each other through the radio when you don't have cell phone connection. Believe it or not, there are places that we don't have thanks God. And one thing that is important really in this forum, and I am happy that you invited me but for most, to say that also voices in the South are very diverse. And the voices in the South, in the global South, are very diverse in many aspects. I am now sitting here in one of the few, let's say, wilderness areas. We will not be able to show much about the area, but let's say it's like Alaska between Juneau and Anchorage, but about 100 years ago, if not more. And we're facing big challenges. They're building routes, they're building infrastructure for green hydrogen. Still, the paradigm is that of a development that it's really challenging. And so when we have different voices, it's because still we have areas where we can be connected without mediation to wild nature. And that means with really artisanal fishery, people that fish with nets,
Right.
and you eat raw fishes with them, or shellfish like king crab, sea urchins. We still have indigenous medicine here, which is very, very sophisticated. Both my grandparents now are coming back. They ended up working together
Hmm.
Actually, they were able to cure some of the cancer cases through surgery and combination with
Hmm.
medicinal plants. And Silvio Rozzi, my grandfather, that started with the Capuchins, also included in the late years the Mapuche herbolaria and
Hmm.
working with shamans that are called machi. Is a man or a woman that uses medicinal plants and or medicinals that are depending on breathing or mat or other treatments like barefoot on rain, that
Hmm.
at the end has a lot of similarities of intersections with some of this hydrotherapy or
Hmm.
therapies that come from different regions. And today, finally, in Chile, we have also this is accepted by the Ministry of Health that you can also go through this indigenous medicine in Chile with health insurance. And so we have acupuncture, health insurance for acupuncture, indigenous medicine, but also surgeries and things like that.
Hmm.
Uh, so is this multiplicity of knowledges, and then the paradox, the violence, and the justice question is, I said we're for peace, but you know, Yacuria, the Jesuits assassinated in El Salvador in Central America. So many leaders that are each year assassinated, are prosecuted. They include some of the Catholic Church from the US, like Dorothy Stang, no?
Hmm.
No, more than 20, 30 years ago now. And so how to be able to bring this to the front and show that we should have hope. I mean, it's not another world is possible. I think this world, if we would be able to bring this to the front and express this diversity, then this would be a different reality.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it really would. And yeah, it's important to, I think, keep emphasizing that and keep that hope alive because, like you said, this wisdom is here. These ways of knowing are here, and they never fully went away anywhere. And I think some people like to say they did because wouldn't that be convenient for the powers that be? They're like, oh, those ways of knowing, they're gone, so we don't have to worry about them. Like, no, they're still here, and if we can just tend to them, then we can coordinate to solve the big challenges of our day, cultivate a world of peace, of sustainability, of regeneration, um, and uh, and I wonder if you could say a little about how panentheism fits into this. Why is that way of knowing important for this kind of work?
I think somehow this brings intersections of worldviews. Talking
Mm,
about martyrs of the environment, a person I knew and she was Marxist, but she was an indigenous woman, is Berta
mm,
Cáceres.
mm,
Probably you are aware that she was killed, assassinated in her own bed. I mean, by snipers. Or yeah. So and she was assassinated because she was opposing the construction of dams in El Salvador.
mm,
And she was a she was a Lenca, and the Lenca people are the most numerous indigenous people in El Salvador. And she always talked about the spirit of the river.
mm,
Uh, well, then you read Leonardo Boff, the spirit of the rock, the spirit of the tree, and that God is in nature. And that presence, I think, of energetic and actual beings and connection is something that is so vital in indigenous communities in Latin America. I have lived at least a little bit in the Amazonian, in Central America, and of course here in South and South America. And you feel the spirit of the trees, the spirit, and these are ancestors. These are depending on, with some variation. So answers, well, now with panentheism, somehow to be connected to cosmos, to be once, is appealing, and ecofeminism are taking in Latin America this too. I mean, bringing first the voice of the spirit and bringing now the fine distinctions of what it means panentheism, pantheism, and why this is opposed. I could also suggest you to invite Luca Valera and those that are kind of theologian in that aspect. But for me, in the practice, when we read Leonardo Boff, because in these communities, what we do very often is to listen oral traditions, but sometimes we read short readings and then we have a conversation, and they are appealing. And Leonardo Boff defines himself as a panentheist and give examples like I have given. I mean, one of the essays that is most appealing to people is hugging the trees and being one with the tree and through the tree with God. That God at the end is the tree.
Right.
And I think that is the appealing part of this. And for me, as an ecologist and scientist somehow, again, it surprises me how connected are we also through the biophysical dimension. In which sense that at the end, we really learn that in terms of the concept of holobionts that we are now, holobionts with this microbiome that we share a lot with the trees, not only the genes for the mitochondria and the kind of eukaryote cells, but we share a lot of the archaea, the bacteria, the viruses. So there is an actual interconnection that is extremely interesting. And that is the invisible reality that today is absolutely visible for science, but is denied with pesticides, with monocultures. And so, of course, we get a loss in our biophysical bodies, therefore health. And so it's not only something that is esoteric, it's real health, it's real connection, practical knowledge. And that is my praxis understanding, practical understanding of how panentheism is community embodied. So Leonardo is not from Mars or from a cathedral coming here. And many of these people are very kind of syncretic in their beliefs. I mean, with syncretism, spirits of the trees with praying and following the religious calendar too. There is a lot here in the sociology of the church that is another thing, but I would prefer to leave that out. I am aware that it has changed through the dictatorships. It has shifted. Catholicism has less prevalence. There are many kind of new schools of Christians, new evangelical churches, and they are not politically neutral, but still with the communities that I spend most of my work are rural communities that are still keeping this kind of Catholic indigenous worldviews syncretism, and in my case, indigenous from the Veneto, from the Alps, because somehow it's, although they're in Italy, they're still very Christian, but they have some also very biophysical, I mean, connection, material connection with the plants, the animals, and thanking always the rain and not the rain. So I think that by better valuing this connection that we have in Western civilization and beyond, we can have this heterogeneous picture of the world, and we're not condemned. I see there in the Anthropocene an outcome that goes for life, but I see also the big challenge of asymmetries in power, in communication, in military power and discourses. And I hope we can make with this some difference to really appeal for peace, for negotiations, and I'm thinking the Middle East, I'm thinking Russia, Ukraine, and I'm thinking Africa, and
Mhm.
so many conflicts that we have also in Latin America, that it is possible. It is still possible to do this. And I only have admiration for those that give their lives for this. And they're still alive, some of them, some have passed away, but there is a hope. And I would say also that's very interesting in the case of Leonardo Boff about something for this program. Leonardo Boff, when he did his PhD
Hmm.
in Germany, he studied with Heisenberg.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yes.
Huh.
So it's very interesting that one piece of knowledge that's not deny the other. And I asked him, what did he do at when he returned to Brazil from his PhD? What was the first thing he did?
Hmm.
And he said, I translated the whole work of Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst,
Right.
into Portuguese.
Oh, wow.
And you can understand the language of both still today with archetypes and things. So to really recover this idea that religion theology is study from different, is not one or the other.
Yeah.
Uh, and that is very important. And that's the way I feel myself. I mean, you said music, I said music, but at least for me, science, philosophy go together in the everyday life, like for Leonardo Boff goes religion and understanding. And I hope this brings a little bit of context and ground to some of the ideas that are coming from the South, and some of them are more articulated, like rights for nature or biocultural rights for rivers.
Hmm.
But I think the very important resistant milieu here and in other regions of the world is in the everyday practice, where we still have the values of solidarity, if not said, practiced.
Right. Yeah. No, that's beautifully put, and really encouraging, because obviously between conflict and war and environmental destruction, sometimes the Anthropocene doesn't seem super hopeful, and to remember it's like, well, but also maybe get off of our phones and look at the communities that are out there actually doing this work, and then you see they are keeping our places alive, our communities alive, and so I really appreciate that that hopeful note, a hope grounded in practice, in the actual lives of actual communities. That's just really encouraging, really inspiring, and really just love hearing the way that you think interconnectedness across so many different domains. Just biophysical sciences, philosophy, theology, indigenous communities, and so many different ways of finding this common interconnectedness. I really appreciate that, and that's so much about what the Forum on Religion Ecology is trying to do, trying to bridge these worlds. And so, yeah, absolutely love hearing your perspective on it. And geez, that's probably a hopeful note to end on. I like to end on a hopeful note because it's easy to end on despair these days. Uh,
Mhm.
and But I'll have you back on the show another time. So I think we have tons more to talk about, and just love hearing about the work you're doing.
No, thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for these open dialogues. And it is a fact that many people live better with biological diversity. Earth stewards or custodians are a reality,
Yeah.
like a person that has a ranch, she or he would like the best for the ranch, the cattle, the family. And those habits in those continuous habitats, taking into account the well-being of many co-inhabitants, humans and other than humans, I think is embedded in many networks, and I see there the possibility for the near future. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Ricardo Rozzi, thank you so much. This has really been a treat. And like I said, we'll definitely have to do it again sometime. So thank you so much. Excuse me. You got me choked up. It was just too poignant and beautifully said. So this was just a delight, and really appreciate finally getting to talk to you, considering that I just missed you at the University of North Texas. So thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back with some more conversations for you soon. In the meantime, take care and be well.